As I think you know, right before the gospel procession, the deacon comes to the priest and asks for a blessing. And this morning, I gave my blessing to Deacon Brian. I started it off by saying, Brian, you better read well, because you've got two excellent readers that you have to follow and keep up the momentum. So, great job today, girls. Really, thank you. And you better enjoy that, because on down the road, when you're a reader, people aren't going to applaud you every time, but you still need to do that good of a job. So today, the gospel that we heard, it's really the beginning of Luke's gospel. I mean, Luke's gospel actually starts with what's called the infancy narrative, with the story of Jesus' birth. But then, in terms of his adult ministry, it begins with him coming to the synagogue in Nazareth, reading the passage from Isaiah, and then dramatically setting it aside and saying, "It has begun." God's way is truly taking place. And the thing is, that's the message that we find in Luke's gospel over and over again. Luke has been called the gospel of the poor, the gospel of women, the gospel of the disenfranchised. Because in Luke's gospel, Jesus is portrayed as having a particular interest, a particular care for the poor, for the sick, for those that are considered outcasts or not important. And also in Luke's gospel, women that were not considered an important part of society at the time play a very, very prominent role in the gospel. As you may know, we in the Catholic Church, with our lectionary, we are in a 3-year set of cycles. The first year, it's called Year A. I don't know how they came up with that name, but there you go. In ordinary time, that's when we hear passages from the Gospel of Matthew. Year B, which we were in last year, we heard mostly from the Gospel of Mark. And this year, which you would guess is year... Beautiful. Okay, you're still with me. Excellent. We are hearing and will hear from the Gospel of Luke. And I find that very interesting, because these next couple of weeks, and then once we finish Easter through the end of November, which is the end of the church year, we'll be hearing from Luke's gospel. Well, between now and early November, we have a presidential campaign. And how perfect for us, maybe, in the midst of all of the talks and posturing and sometimes lying that we will hear during this upcoming campaign. How important for us to be hearing the message of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke, and to be challenged to take it to heart in how we look at our world, at our society. To be challenged throughout this year is our faith formed by our politics, or are our politics informed by our faith? That's what it means to follow Christ. To bring good tidings to the poor. Announce freedom. The year of favor. As Jesus quoted Isaiah saying, we hear this term a lot, the poor. We lump them into a group. We do good things for them a couple times a year with food drives and clothes drives and giving trees. And the rest of the time? The Brazilian Archbishop Helder Câmara is famous for having said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor are hungry, they call me a communist." We've seen something very, very similar in a short amount of time with Pope Francis. Many in the media, many in the political sphere have been quick to label him a socialist, a communist. And as soon as we can put a label on him, then we can just brush him off. Then we don't have to pay attention anymore. But he constantly calls us to not forget that which we feel uncomfortable remembering. Jesus said, proclaim good news to the poor. The good news he meant was not necessarily that then they'll be rich. The poor will be the ones who somehow have all the power, and then they'll have the opportunity to ignore the others. No, that's not good news. Proclaim good news to the poor. The poor have an equal dignity in the eyes of God. The poor should have at least an equal dignity in the eyes of Christ's followers. One of the basic principles of Catholic social teaching is that we have a preferential option for the poor. That when policy is being considered, when structures are being put into place, that the needs of the poor play an overriding role in the decisions that are made. We don't see that too often. We see the ones that already have the wealth, the power, the fame. They seem to have the inside track on getting what they want. When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. When I ask why the poor are hungry, they call me a communist. Well, let me share with you some other words from some communists throughout history. That which is already due in justice to the poor is not to be offered as a gift of charity. That dirty, rotten commie was Pope Paul VI in 1965. Not to enable the poor to share in our goods is to steal from them and deprive them of life. The goods we possess are not ours, but theirs. Oh boy, which liberal thinker over in Europe said that? Well, it turns out it was St. John Chrysostom in the 5th century. And Pope Gregory the Great echoed something. When we attend to the needs of those in want, we give them what is theirs, not ours. More than performing works of mercy, we are paying a debt of justice. 5th century, Saint Pope Gregory the Great. Now, this is not meant to be a guilting time, because then the gospel is not good news for us. But rather, it is a call for us to make sure that all people have the opportunity to have their dignity in the eyes of God, their dignity as human beings, upheld. This may be one of the greatest challenges that as followers of Christ we can hear. To move away from a spirit of mine to a spirit of our. To accept the fact that just as for our family members, for our brothers and sisters, we would try to make sure that if they're in a bad situation, it can be changed. To expand our vision of what it means to be a brother or a sister. How we do that? Sometimes it has to do with counting on our leaders to have that understanding, to have that vision, to have that priority. But we have to be aware. If we're going to ask them to be aware, we have to be willing to remember what Christ calls us to. If we're going to expect them to care for the poor, the outcast, the marginalized. This isn't charity we're talking about. It's what we call in the Christian church true justice. All are God's children. All have a right to share in the goods of creation. All are called to be aware of and to care for our brothers and sisters.